Welcome to Lectionary Call-In for Tuesday, March 16th of 2021. Two laypersons, a pastor, and an academician gather for about 55 minutes each week to discuss the Gospel Lectionary for the coming Sunday. And this Sunday is March 21. Each Tuesday we call in from wherever we may be at 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And for our good friend Charles Willard in Minnesota, that's 5:30 a.m. For this week's lectionary, I'll add that we're in many places at the same time, and we're traveling in cyberspace to see and share. Our little team is working to be faithful to Lectionary Year B. We hope this discussion will provide areas of focus and reflection. And here's how it works. We develop perspectives independently after the leadoff person shares some questions, and then in this virtual discussion room, we share, encourage, and challenge each other. And here are the folks joining us in today's discussion.
Sara Mickelson.
Bill Hall.
Charles Willard.
And I'm Don Upton. And speaking of the leadoff person, that would be Sara Mickelson. Hello, Sara. Can't wait to see what you have in store for us today.
First, I want to say good morning to John Wells and his wife, who I know are listeners. And John was kind enough to mention each of you and the call when I saw him in the grocery store this week. So it was kind of fun to go, I know those eyes, just above that mask. So, good morning. And we are looking at John chapter 12, verses 20 through 33. And a lot has happened since our last reading in John last week. So since that passage, Jesus has raised Lazarus from the dead in Bethany. He has entered Jerusalem through the singing of hosannas and waving of palms. And this is the beginning of Holy Week in John's Gospel. So this is some of the final address that Jesus makes to his disciples. And that the world of Jerusalem can see in this dialogue. So I'll start the reading with verse 20. Now among those who went up to worship at the festival were some Greeks. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and said to him, Sir, we wish to see Jesus. Philip went and told Andrew, and then Andrew and Philip went and told Jesus. Jesus answered them, The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Those who love their life lose it, and those who hate their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, there will my servant be also. Whoever serves me, the Father will honor. Now my soul is troubled, and what should I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it is not for this reason that I have come into this hour. Father, glorify your name. And then a voice from heaven, I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. And the crowd standing there heard it and said it was thunder. Others said an angel had spoken to him. And Jesus answered, This voice has come for your sake, not mine. For now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. And he said this to indicate the kind of death he was going to die. That ends our scripture reading. Wow. I sometimes think when I ask questions of teenagers that I get a whole lot more information than I anticipated when they answer. And it seems like this is one of those conversations that when Philip and Andrew approach and go, hey, there's some people here that want to meet you, they get this response. It's a big idea. There's a lot of information here. So let me get my dog out of the bag. My questions this week have a lot to do with How do you think John's Gospel answers the request, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus," from the visiting Greeks? Bill, you want to try me on this one?
I will give it a go. As we said before we started recording, this is a challenging passage, so I liked your word "wow" after you read it. It really is a challenge. Several details that a lot of the commentaries point out. There's no indication that Jesus actually interacted with these Greeks. Now, we can assume he did, but an impression I have is that the question, "we want to see Jesus," prompts these challenging statements by Jesus, which I think were intended for everyone to hear. They weren't, in other words, a personal message to these Greeks, but are meant for everyone. And in a sense, the Greeks coming forward is a confirmation of what happens a little earlier in this chapter, where the Pharisees say to one another, "You see, you can do nothing. Look, the whole world has gone after him." And it's almost like John is saying, and for example, these Greek people want to see Jesus. It's almost as if John wants to confirm the Pharisees' consternation. You're right, Pharisees. This isn't just for a select group. And of course, it's obvious that John makes a great emphasis on seeing. Now, I don't want to make too much of this, but given my curious mind, I did a search in the New Revised Standard Version of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, assuming that John would much more often use a form of the verb see. That is not true. The usage, now Mark is a bit less, but basically they all use that verb or a form of it very often. But we know that seeing is important to John. And it's another thing about the Greeks' question or their coming is we're told again a little earlier in this chapter that the chief priests wanted to kill Lazarus. And also we know that Jesus was a target of their anger. Therefore, the Pharisees see a threat to their power and position. By contrast, these Greeks want to see, at least out of curiosity, because we're not told what the motive was, right? It just simply, they say, we want to see Jesus. And in some ways, that's more powerful, I think. It's open-ended. We can, in imagination, think, well, maybe they were just curious. Maybe they really wanted something more. Whatever, they said they wanted to see Jesus. And it seems to me, Sarah, that what Jesus wants his listeners to see, I can address with your third question. Okay, so I'll save it for then. I just found myself pondering this idea of we want to see Jesus. The pulpits that I preach from, like probably, 90% of pulpits in America, had this verse right there on the pulpit. When I approached it, the words were there very attractively, "Sir, we would see Jesus." And for me, that was an invitation and an encouragement that ultimately people weren't there to see me or whoever the preacher is. Somehow we want to introduce them to Jesus, which if I understand some things Charles has stressed for several weeks, that John is interested that Jesus Christ is the good news, not just one who preaches the good news. And so I'll stop with that. I think any conversation about this should end with 3 dots.
Thank Bill. Charles, you want to throw anything in?
Yes, I want to make the observation or suggestion that I think that we tend to approach our reading of the Gospels, and John would be no exception, of a recollection of the way things were, but if you think about it, John is constructing this gospel. He's constructing his version of the life of Jesus for the creation of the church many years after it happened, and I'm less confident at this point that there was, and that John knew for a fact that there were two Greeks who came and said, "Sir, we'd like to see Jesus." How do you put it? Yeah. They came. We wish to see Jesus. For me, I now think I'm more likely to view this as a construct. It's John's way of setting the stage for what comes next. But, whether they were Greeks, whether there were two of them or three of them or one of them, whether they said it exactly this way, John wasn't worried about that. He didn't have a stenographic pad that showed, this is what they said. He made it up, if I can put it baldly, to set the stage for what he was going to then lay out in the rest of the text, which is what happens. I mean, you never see any interaction. You never see, like in an earlier exchange with Nicodemus, where Nicodemus said, well, what about this and what about that and what about the other? That never happens here. Here we simply get the stage set, and then the Greeks disappear. And what happens next is a conversation, a statement by Jesus of the way things are going to turn out, which is what John was intending to do. So it was a stage setting, not I don't have to worry about what do the Greeks mean and what are the questions do they ask. I don't think they ask any questions.
Don, what are your thoughts about this?
I think when you raised the question, you were saying it's so much. I think that's the word you used. It's so much here. And we were talking, like Bill said, we were talking about this before we began recording this podcast. There's so much, but I want to hold that up in the face of the human condition, which is, it's not that there's so much, it's that there's no answer. The literary tradition, the global literature, the modern literature tradition is that there's no answer. And you can use, I could do it in a very general list, which would be, think about things. Right? Do you love me? No answer. Am I going to get the job? No answer. Today's words are, you get ghosted. Do you love me? Am I going to get the job? Are you going to call me back? The bigger. What is the meaning of what I'm doing? What is the meaning of our endeavors? What is the meaning of my life today? Are you there? Or from the great songs, how long, O Lord? And the theme that we're accustomed to and that literature makes go is, I don't know. There's no answer. So even though there's so much, I just wanted to be sure there was this counter truth out there, which is, well, it's quiet. And in this case, we get so much. So if you're facilitating a class, moderating a discussion group on this, maybe set that out and then get the long list. All right, you said there's so much. How much? What is it so much? Because usually it's quiet. We get ghosted in the world of social media. This isn't about ghosting at all. There's so much. So the so much, if you had a whiteboard or something, it would be, somebody might say transformation, because we have the seed, glorification, seeking, drawing in, service, love, on and on and on. So I just wanted to be sure I had this counter truth in terms of the no answer. And all this information. So it takes me to the voice for your sake. The explanation is a voice for your sake. And I'm wondering, with all this stuff, travel, asking, seeking, tourism, religious tourism, maybe, visitations, philosophy, service, friendship, the archetypes that are being raised up here in terms of Greeks, learning, philosophy, all of it in this incredibly dense passage. And then you've got right there as a kind of bookend for your sake. And I don't know about you, but when I hear that voice, that's the voice of creation. Who is that? What is that voice? I'm going to say that's Genesis 1. So what is this drawing in this creation for your sake, for our sake? And I think what I've been led to this week is all that stuff, so much in Sarah's words. There's so much is the excitement that there is so much. We are not ghosted. It is not quiet, but there is so much, and it's related to all of those things. This is not a shallow human endeavor of cultural tourism. It is all of it, and that human interaction and the life of Christ is related to the depths of humankind and our experiences. And it's humankind, all of it. Years ago, John Debevoise, who's the senior pastor at the church where all of us got to know each other, he said something like, and I'm paraphrasing, if it's the Greeks, and the Greeks are the whole world, or represent that it's the whole world of humankind, then, quote, then the gate has opened, unquote. That's my best shot, Sarah.
Yeah, I spent some time thinking about what we have been told by the Pharisees, and you mentioned this, Bill, that right before this passage opens, the Pharisees are talking about how the whole world is looking to Jesus now, instead of coming to the temple and looking there for direction, confirmation, affirmation, all of those things. It kind of lifted up for me, or it made me think about, I should say, made me wonder, are the Greeks the every person character here? In that, isn't that what we all do? We all kind of approach this conversation with, I'd like to see Jesus. And it's almost like the entire Gospel of John is to answer that question. And that talks about the universality of the search for Jesus, the universality of trying to reconcile what happens in the world to what we understand about the Creator. It lifts up for me, or it draws me in gathering this idea of inhaling everything to exhale into the language of, I want to see Jesus. And I think that this also is the culmination of the Messianic secret, the idea that the Messiah is not who humanity has expected the Messiah to be. It's not the stereotypical Messiah. You're going to come in, you're going to slay all the Roman people that are dominating us. You're going to overturn everything and bring creation back into harmony and into, if you will, a kingship that's based in the Hebrew tradition of David. This is something altogether different and new, and I think it's about reconciling the entire world. And I think the Greeks step into this particular arena because they are not traditional people we would see visiting Jerusalem during Passover. Our brain doesn't put that character into that story. And so it's this implication that the whole world is hungry for this. It's not just the people who are in Jerusalem. It's not just the people who are following Jesus. It's people who are hearing from the people who saw Jesus do something miraculous in Galilee and have come to see who that person is. So it's an interesting crossroads of ideas and of people and of cultures starting to look to Jesus for pointers. So I think this is a lovely moment of culmination, or I should say a delta, if you will. No pun on the Greek term there, but the idea that things are coming together and we're about to see something. God's about to unfold the story. I do find it interesting that the voice has come for your sake, not mine. That it's about a statement from the Creator about what his particular important task or overarching goal has been. So I thought that was really interesting. And John opens his gospel in a very Greek way, with the way he describes in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And so I wonder if the idea that John's gospel is pointed to a population that's been heavily influenced by the philosophy of the Greeks and the ideas that the Greek process of education has brought to the table. So I think it's interesting that there's a point here where John goes, everybody's looking for this particular person, this particular expression of the Creator. And that leads me to question number 2, which is, what information does this passage present to us as we consider the same question? Now, I don't know if you can remember when you first asked the question, is, I want to see Jesus. When did that idea pop into your head? How old were you? And how have you revisited this particular question as you have pursued or made your pilgrimage throughout your life toward better understanding the Christ and better understanding the purposes of the Creator? And this time I'll go to you, Don. Do you have a response to how does this passage or information present itself to you as you consider it?
In my endeavors, I think there's supposed to be a connection to my endeavors every day. If it's complex, if there's so much of the answer, then I think I can apply it to my own endeavors. Travel, requests for meetings, anything that has to do with asking, seeking, or responding. I think it would apply there. Travel, requests for meetings, connecting people. We all do that. That's part of our lives today, especially in the kind of cyberspace we live in. I spend much of my day every day connecting people to each other. You need to meet, and this is why. I've been doing it all week with a friend of mine. It's like you two need to meet because I care about you two, or I think you have a lot in common. I think there's a lot of that there. Giving, looking, asking, insights, and it's not. I'm not raising it just to say in generality, but that there's an ethic to it that we're supposed to consider if we're sharing an insight. The purpose, what we're doing, and that there are these answers. We're just not flailing around, but there's a Christian ethic in it. So I'd say my efforts, my obligation to respond, and maybe be bold that I'm looking. I'm always seeking. I think there's a affirmation of being bold about those things, intentional, but bold. And I keep raising obligation to respond because we live in a world of not responding. So in the first answer I talked about, global literature is all built on somebody not answering you. It could be the Creator. Oh, Lord, how long are you there? Or it could be the beloved. Why don't you love me? Or it could be, everybody knows the word ghost, right? It's like, I applied for a job and nobody responded to me. How can that be? How can people be like this? I think that's tied in. And it's the whom do you seek, how do you seek, or do you seek in everything we do every day? Because at least the Gospel of John tells me a world where there are answers like this, a long, complex list that turns on the love for humankind universally, is really disruptive. And especially if those answers are directly connected to us looking around and connecting each other and asking questions and seeking. And I know there's archetypes involved in this particular piece in terms of Greeks. There's stereotypes. There's the otherness. We're asked to blow right by those things. So this is disruptive. And since you're asking the personal side of this, I'm really intentional about that long list I gave you about travel, meeting, seeking, dining, all those things I do every day. It's exciting. It takes work. And it requires prayerful commitment to what this kind of disruption and seeking really means. That's it.
Thank you, Don. Bill, what are your thoughts? What information does this passage present to us as we consider the same question?
Well, my response is somewhat shaped by some things that are said a little later in this chapter. For example, in verse 37, although Jesus had performed so many signs in their presence, they did not believe in him. Then, interestingly, a few verses later, in verse 42, nevertheless, many even of the authorities believed in Jesus. But he goes on to say, because they feared their fellow Pharisees, they would not confess it. It reminds me of the biblical concept of we see but do not see, we hear but do not hear. I find that it's like that the gospel comforts the afflicted and afflicts the comfortable. To me, this idea of seeing but not seeing, hearing but not hearing, is comforting and challenging, that we are invited to see, but we're to be reminded, in the words of 1 Corinthians 13, at best we see in a glass darkly, a mirror dimly. That's not, to me, an excuse. It's a true statement. And therefore, that's why I think that phrase is so often posted on pulpits. We still need to see. If everybody already sees, then I'm out of a job as a preacher, or we as evangelists or students. And I'd like to think that this is what this lectionary podcast and all the others do, is we still do not really see. So for me, Sarah, it's an encouragement and it's a challenge.
Charles, do you want to throw anything in the mix?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
I'm going to just say that later in chapter 20, John gives us the image of Mary standing outside the tomb. And Jesus walks up and asks her, "Whom are you looking for?" So I think there's this wonderful theme of, for what are you searching? And you will find it in the things that you don't expect. So she thinks that Jesus is a gardener. And she says, "Sir, if you've carried him away, please tell me where you've taken him." And then Jesus says her name, and she sees him as Jesus. So it's this lovely, I call it the bookending of this idea of, what are you looking for? We wish to see Jesus. Those two bits and pieces go together. I think there's some lovely, John does some wonderful language work for us about seeing and about really seeing and about seeing and understanding and hungering for a reveal. So for me, I just found that very affirming, that we are continually on the lookout, or that we're continually playing that pursuit as the purpose of our living and the practice of our following. I am the way, the truth, and the life. For what are you looking? So that brings me to question number 3. If I get to the right screen. And Jesus says in verse 32, and I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. In this particular passage, John presents us with an image of an ingathering, a drawing of all to Jesus just before he breathes his final breath and exhales his final breath, releasing the Holy Spirit into the world. What does what does this lift up for us? And I have to confess that in thinking about this, I am in the work of practicing physical exercise. And it's interesting how when you breathe appropriately you bring in air and you push out air with the work effort, or the effort that you're putting forth in the exercise that you're doing. And if you breathe properly, it assists you with your exercise versus works against you. And I thought about this ingathering and this exhaling process in the work that Jesus was doing, and how that might impact the effectiveness of this particular moment for us, and how you gain strength from bringing everybody in, and you give yourself away with an exhale. So that was my thinking behind this question. Bill, you want to go for it?
I think it was last week that we talked about the various nuanced meanings of being lifted up. It can mean literally being lifted up on the cross. It can mean being exalted, okay? And I think clearly both are involved here. I realize there's a risk in using slogans, but one that I don't remember how old I was before I began to hear this: no cross, no crown. That idea that I think this is what Jesus wanted people to see. By the way, listening to several of you, it occurred to me, in one sense, Jesus in this passage is the only one who clearly sees. He sees the path before him. That's why I think he said, this voice from heaven wasn't for me, it was for you. So Jesus clearly sees that he is going to suffer and die in order for new life to come. So again, the cross and the crown are both symbols, and I think that's a part of what lifted up means. I also like the sense of inclusiveness. I will draw all people, reminding us, of course, of Philippians chapter 2. Therefore, God also highly exalted Jesus and gave him the name that is above every name, so that the name of Jesus every knee should bend in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, for the glory of God the Father. That's a powerful vision. I don't know exactly what it means. I don't know how to resolve the issue of, do you have to actually confess Jesus Christ as Lord? Do you have to believe all the right things? I'm willing to leave it to God to set the boundaries, but I tried to commit my life and ministry to drawing that Christ will draw all people to himself. And that to me is, Sarah, part of the excitement of Easter, that Christ died for all. Christ is risen for all. Thank you.
I like that idea of inclusiveness. That was attractive to me as well. In this particular passage, it makes a lot of sense to me that you can be entrenched in the temple process, you can be a Greek visiting the city for tourism, or you can be a follower from Galilee. All are finding what they seek in Jesus. And I will add that it's Philip that says to someone else, "Come and see. I think we found the Messiah. Come and see." So there's this idea that's part of the contagious and charismatic process of understanding or seeking to understand and follow. Don, what are your thoughts about what is this lift up, this idea of ingathering, exhaling, and being lifted up and glorified? What does that bring to your thought or factor in this story?
Well, Bill Wallach, who used to teach the lectionary class for generations at Palm Lucia Presbyterian Church, we usually highlight at this point in the lectionary that there's two lifting ups in John. They need to look at the dimension of lifting up the cross and then lifting up from the tomb. Look at those together, and you reminded me of that because you raised at the tomb what happened. And in John, I think it's John, don't cling to me. Don't cling to me. And I think that's connected to this. If he says, woman, don't cling to me, that could be a universal statement as well, because Sarah, you and I have talked about this a lot over the years, that the tendency is to freeze time and build a memorial to the fallen teacher, and to remember statically, to just freeze them in time, just like they wanted to do at the Transfiguration. And that's not possible. That's what the lifting up from the tomb is, that this goes on. And it's finished, but there's so much to do. And a part of that so much to do does include the universal, the seeking. The value of being with other people is a part of this. Don't cling to me because there's so much and there's so many, and it's I'm reading this more universally than I ever have before. I used to say years ago, it's the personal and it's the universal, and I'm just like, it's the universal. There's something for me in the universal. Period. It's also got a negative to it. What doesn't work, that on my own, I can't cling to something on my own and hold it in place. And forgive me, I mean, I read and I like to seek and I like to meet people, but books alone don't work. Literature doesn't work. Doctrine doesn't work. In some ways, certainty doesn't work. You can't hold Christ to yourself. It's universal. It doesn't work. Words on their own are no good. Back to where we started in this discussion, it's so much. And I think I'm being asked to dwell on the so much. There's no vacation from this. There's no arrival in our sense of arrival. There's no vacation. There's a lot to do today, and there's a lot of responsibility with it. But all people don't cling to what their idea of Jesus is if we engage with each other. And I think there's a simplicity that comes out of this. At least for me, I'm looking at my schedule differently today. I'm talking with a lot of people. I'm meeting with a lot of people. I have the power to hurt them. I have the power to ignore them, which is one of my weaknesses. I have the power to ignore. And this is a call to think differently about those things. Thanks, Sarah.
Charles, what are your thoughts?
I'm still thinking about this analogy of the seed dying, and I'm not sure where I get if I start out on this path, but if I think about the seed in life thinks that it's pretty sharp, I think. It's pretty good looking. And yet the seed that dies, what is released when that seed, which we see at that point, it was actually only a shell that has been protecting, but it's still only served the job of of protecting what was inside, which then grew and became manifold. And I have a hard time thinking about sort of where I am in that process. Am I the old shell that's going to drop away, or am I something else that got born? And it's it's a wonderfully perplexing process. Thank you.
I agree with you. I think that's really sweet. Bill, what were you going to say?
Real quickly, a little interesting historic note that I discovered yesterday in the latest issue of Christian Century. This passage was the focus of Oscar Romero's last sermon before he was assassinated in El Salvador. Now, whether or not that particularly prompted his assassination, we don't know, but you talk about being lifted up. You know, here the forces of evil killed him, and yet the desire for human rights continued. So it's just an interesting footnote to history that this is the last passage that he preached on before he was killed.
Wow. Thank you. I'm still drawing back into the breathing in and breathing out. The Holy Spirit, the breath of God that gave Adam animation, that brought Eve into the world, all of these things that have been spoken into creation. And here we have another expression of that. It is quite profound, and I'm struck by the way that Jesus talks about the seed in the same way that I am thinking about this ingathering and then the casting of all of the seeds into moving time forward with an expression of the Creator, imbuing each of those seeds moving forward. There are some seeds that only germinate after they've been eaten. That they need the acid bath of the digestive process of birds before they can even crack the shell open and if you will, wake up into plants. So I'm thinking about, the journey that we all take to discover who we are in relationship to our Creator and how we become followers. Some of us, have to be stone ground and then broken into pieces before we can offer anything back to the world. But there's something really powerful about that. The seed metaphor is just a rich one for me, and that each seed has the instructions that it needs to do what it needs to do, and it just needs to be awakened. It's kind of a lovely thought. So I think about the inhaling and the exhaling. I think about the seeds, and I think about being lifted up so that we can all get a better look at what God is doing. So do you want to see Jesus? and that's a really powerful and profound thing. Come and see. I think we found the Messiah. Where have you laid him? I'm looking for my Lord. Have you seen him? So all of these moments, these vignettes where the word see factors into the illumination of God's doing, what God is doing, is so profound in the book of John. I'm really fond of this book. So, anybody want to add anything else? You guys are so quiet.
Just turn it the other way. Of the four, I prefer the gospel. I prefer the synoptic gospels to John. That's where I am.
I get tangled up in stardust, so that makes perfect sense for me.
I like the way you put that. It makes me want to overwrite everything when somebody says, "Let me go see him. Where is he? Hand him over." That's in the gospel too. Hand him over. Let me have him. We're seeking him, and then what comes after your ellipses, Bill, say let's ... John is about ... I'll put, hand him over. Let me have him. And that's where the universal goes away. But I think there's a subtext for everything that happens, especially like even the women at the tomb. Where'd you take him? Let me have him. I think we are wrapping up, and we're just about out of time. And Palmacia Presbyterian Church is at 3501 West San Jose. That's in Tampa, Florida. And for more information, you can go to palmacia.org. That's PALMACEIA.org. We always remind you that's a good place to go for other conversations about the same lectionary passage. So we commend that to you also for great sermons, prayers, reflections, and outstanding music. And if you want to drop us a note at the Lectionary Call-In team, just go to lectionarycallin@palmacia.org. And you're always welcome, and we'll see you next time.